Congresswoman,
Should
you
Chuck
mentioned
Schumer stay as minority leader?
I think what is so important for folks to understand is that this problem is bigger than one person, and it actually is bigger than the minority leader in the Senate. You had 8 Senate Democrats who coordinated their own votes on this, as well as you have 2 retiring members. Many of them are also up in several cycles from now, with the hope that people are going to forget this moment. And I think what's important is that we understand that this is not just a leader is a reflection of the party, and Senate Democrats have selected their leadership to represent them. And so the question needs to be bigger than just one person. We have several Senate primaries this cycle. I know I'm being asked about New York. That is years from now. I have to remind my own constituents because they think that this election is this year. We actually do have Senate elections this year, and my hope is that people across this country actually participate in their primary elections in selecting their leadership. Thank you.
You didn't really answer the question.
Thank you.
Boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. So we got to talk about some major developments within the Democrat Party, because if you weren't aware, the party is currently undergoing a civil war, okay? The progressive lunatics, including socialists and communists, are currently trying to take over the party, over that is currently being run by the failing establishment Democrat leadership. People like Hakeem Jeffries, people like Chuck Schumer, they're on a chopping block. The freaks and the lunatics, they smell blood in the water, okay? And they're going after the Democrats, and this could be a great thing for Republicans.
Now, Graham Platner, an oyster farmer and combat veteran, is hoping to challenge both Senator Collins and the Democratic Party establishment. But in recent weeks, he's faced an onslaught of damaging revelations, including past offensive comments on social media and a tattoo on his chest that resembles a Nazi symbol, which I understand he has since covered up. Now, my colleague Sahil Kapoor sat down with Graham Platner and asked him how he's been able to keep his campaign viable.
You're still standing.
Yes.
Why is that the case, and how have you been able to transcend what other candidates would not have been able to?
One, I think because I just addressed it. We didn't run away from it. I'm very confident in my worldview. I'm very confident in my politics. But it took years and years of not being confident, of being confused, of being disillusioned, of being angry. It took all of that to get me where I am.
One of the arguments that the Mills team is making and will make is that she's won twice, that she's tested, that she's a safe bet, and that you haven't run for office before and that you would be too risky. How do you respond to that?
I think the risky candidate is the establishment candidate. I think my quote-unquote lack of experience is a positive. People don't want establishment politicians. People don't want to see the same playbook run over and over and over again. A playbook which, by the way, has failed to unseat Susan Collins time after time. I firmly believe the risk is running an establishment candidate that is not trying something new.
Yeah, I think there is some truth to the statement that people don't want establishment politicians. I definitely agree with that. But I don't think that people want communist, anti-white Nazis or alleged Nazis either, right? I don't think that that's what the people want, which is what this guy is offering the voters of Maine. And as I've theorized, okay, I've talked about this a lot on this channel, is that if these freaks end up winning these Democrat primaries, they're going to get blown out in general elections. Lo and behold, we have a bombshell poll showing that this guy is losing heavily, right, to a Republican in the Senate general race, even though he is competitive in the Democrat primary against the current Democrat sitting governor, Janet Mills. So without further ado, let's read this, because again, this is a big deal. This might be the best hope for Republicans and Trump coming up in the midterms to keep the majority in the House and maybe even expand the majority in the Senate. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into it. Maine Democratic Senate candidate Graham Platner, who had a Nazi tattoo and called white rural people racist and stupid, would lose a general election against incumbent Republican Senator Susan Collins, according to a poll commissioned by the Democratic group Emily's List. Now, again, am I a big fan of Susan Collins? No, I'm not a big fan. But would I rather have her over a anti-white communist? Yeah, right. So I just want people to understand that Maine is not necessarily a state that is like super heavily Republican. So, in certain situations, in certain states, you just got to take what you can get, right? And in this situation, again, I would rather have somebody like Susan Collins, who, again, I'm not necessarily a fan of, rather than have a full-blown communist, okay? Even though the partisan environment in Maine favors a generic Democrat, Platner trails Collins by 9 points after voters see both a, quote, positive paragraph reflective of Platner's bio and current campaign messaging, and a negative paragraph summarizing the recent news about him and reflecting likely Republican messaging in a general election, according to an Emily's List memo obtained by Politico. Once Mainers read additional information, including quotes in his own words from his online posts and information about his Nazi tattoo, Platner's support plummets, with Collins beating him by a staggering 19 points in the blue-leaning state. Wow. So, again, you're talking about a 19-point blowout in a blue-leaning state. This is what I've been telling you guys about. If Democrats run these freaks, if they run these communists, if they run these socialists, and even left of center states, right? If they run them in statewide elections, they're going to lose. Because, again, I just don't think that the general public wants communists. Again, this guy is a communist. Remember, Kyle Kalinske admitted, hey, this guy's a communist. He's not that bad. He can't be a Nazi because he's a communist. As if being a communist is all that much better than being a Nazi.
Some of your political opponents are telling reporters that tattoo has a Nazi affiliation. And I would like to know, is that accurate? Are you a secret Nazi?
I am not a secret Nazi. Actually, if you read through my Reddit comments, I think you can pretty much figure out where I stand on Nazism,
right,
and anti-Semitism and racism in general. I would say a lifelong opponent.
Yeah, so let me just point out, if you ask the people who are saying this is a deal breaker and they could never support Graham, if you ask them, okay, so do you think he's a Nazi? Even those people will usually say, no, of course not. And the reason the answer is no is because if you look at all of the old Reddit posts that they dug up, if anything, the criticism is, bro, you've, at least in your whole posting history, you've always been very far left. You called yourself a fucking communist at one point, right? And so there isn't a single hint, there's not a whiff of any actual Nazi shit in his comment posting history. When he thought nobody was watching and nobody would see these things, it was always, if anything, super far left. So that's why this attack feels very gross. Is like, you're saying he's a Nazi without saying he's a Nazi while knowing he's not a Nazi, right? And so there's something very icky about that. Because, like, even the people bringing it up are going, well, of course he's not a Nazi, but this tattoo was a Nazi tattoo. And it's like, I genuinely believe him that he had no idea when he got it. Right now, I just see leftists trying to shit on Graham Platner, and they're doing the right's dirty work for them. And I'm sorry, it doesn't make you holier than thou that you fell for a fucking AIPAC Palantir smear campaign. Because he's not a Nazi. Everybody knows he's not a Nazi. Even the people who are angry about the tattoo admit he's not a Nazi. So, like, what are we doing here?
Yeah, so again, not a Nazi, but a communist, right? So, therefore, vote for the guy, right? Vote for the communist because, he's not really a Nazi, okay? He just got the Nazi tattoo, like, I don't know, decades ago, and, allegedly knew that it had Nazi symbolism, but just decided recently that it should be a good idea to cover it up, right? Especially, again, if you're going to be running for a political office at the federal level. Yeah, he's a communist. So therefore, it's okay to support him, right? Because we don't really believe he's a Nazi. Maine is one of Democrats' top Senate targets in next year's elections. Platner's campaign has found itself torn apart by controversy since reports broke of the candidate's old Reddit post in which, among other things, he said that, quote, all cops are bastards, called himself a communist, blamed victims of sexual assault for getting raped, and promoted violence against people he considered fascist. In response to one post titled, quote, white people aren't as racist or stupid as Trump thinks, Platner wrote, living in white rural America, I'm afraid to tell you they actually are. He was presumably referring to Maine, where he has lived since 2018. Yeah, so this guy said outright, okay, there's no other interpretation of this, that white rural Americans are racist and stupid. This is what he said, okay? Now, I want people to understand that's not just what he believes. That's what all of these far left communists believe. And it is not an exaggeration for me to say that. They all believe that white rural Americans are stupid. That's what they believe. He's just saying it out loud. So I want people to understand when these communists tell you how they care about everybody, how they're just trying to feed everybody, they just want to give you health care, right? They want the government to take care of you. No, they want the government to take over your life. They want you to be a slave to the government because, again, in their minds, you're so racist and stupid that, again, you can't take care of yourself. You are not able to be self-reliant. You need the government support. You need to give him power and control to control your life because, again, you're racist and you're stupid. This is what they all think. Not just him, but this is what they all believe. Okay, this is what they say behind closed doors about Republican voters all the time. Okay, as the controversies mounted, Platner also confessed to having a tattoo of a Nazi symbol, which he has since covered up. The Maine Democrat is facing an exodus of advisors amid the scandals. Late last month, his finance director publicly resigned, saying, quote, "My professional standards as a campaign professional no longer fully align with those of the campaign." Around the same time, his treasurer also announced her resignation. Platner's second campaign manager, meanwhile, left after just 3 days on the job while his political director resigned earlier last month, later telling Politico that she refused $15,000 from the campaign to sign a non-disclosure agreement. Wow. So again, this guy's campaign is falling apart already, okay? While Platner has apologized for the post, saying they're not, quote, indicative of who I am today, Mainers are not buying those apologies. The Emily's List poll found, quote, a lengthy response from Platner constructed with his own language does not change the deep deficit he faces. According to the memo, Collins remains well above 50% and still leads the race by a double-digit margin. Different polls for the Democrat primary have found drastically different results, with one survey last month giving Platner's nearest rival, Governor Janet Mills, a 5-point lead. A different poll released days later found Platner with a 34-point lead, though it was taken before news broke of the Nazi tattoo. Yeah, so basically what you have here is a worst-case scenario. This is a nightmare scenario for Democrats, which is that you have Platner winning the Democrat primary, but getting blown out in a general election because he's a far-left, anti-white communist. And turns out, unlike New York City, in swing states, right, in states where you actually have a large white population and people don't necessarily want communism, that doesn't work well, right? Anti-whiteism, communism is probably not going to win you votes, right? It's not going to win you votes in a state like Maine. So, as I was telling you guys, this is devastating, right? This is actually really bad for Democrats who are currently facing primary challenges from these socialists, from these communists. He's not going to be the last one. There are going to be a whole bunch of these people that are going to run, and they're going to win primaries. And if they win primaries, they're going to get blown out in general elections. What you have here going on in New York is another example of what I'm talking about. There's another bombshell poll that came out in favor of Elise Stefanik being the Republican underdog running against Kathy Hochul in New York. And remember, Hochul got in bed with Zohran Mamdani. She got in bed with Tax the Rich. She got in bed with all of his socialist ideas that she admitted that she can't actually really do, but she endorsed a socialist. She got in bed with the guy. Lo and behold, Elise Stefanik, who's announced that she's running for governor, in one poll, she was up. She was up. She was beating Kathy Hochul. Now remember, New York is a deep blue state. Deep blue state, okay? Stefanik was beating Hochul in one poll, and another poll came out showing that that poll was not a fluke, that Stefanik is only behind Hochul by 3 points, and they haven't even started campaigning yet. A poll shows Representative Elise Stefanik, who is running for governor in New York, trailing incumbent Governor Kathy Hochul by only 3 percentage points, an early sign that the race could be extremely close if Stefanik wins the GOP primary. The survey of 500 likely New Yorkers by JL Partners, an independent market research firm, found that Hochul leads Stefanik 46% to 43% in a hypothetical matchup with 11% undecided. The poll showed Stefanik 41, far ahead of Nassau County Executive Bruce Blakeman in a primary 74% to 5%. Yeah, so, I mean, she's dominating the primary at this point. So this poll conducted November 9th to November 10th found that 40% of likely New York voters strongly or somewhat approve of Hochul's job performance, while 54% somewhat or strongly disapprove. It found that 37% of voters view Stefanik very or somewhat favorably, while 32% view her somewhat or very unfavorably. The survey had a margin of error of 4.4%. Yeah, so basically it's statistically tied, right? This is statistical tie because the result is within the margin of error. So basically, you have a poll or two polls essentially showing that the race is tied. Again, in a deep blue state where you have Kathy Hochul, who embraced a socialist, running against a Republican, Elise Stefanik. And then you have some bombshell polls out in Maine showing that the communist, who's likely going to beat the sitting Democrat governor, Janet Mills, in the primary, he is losing, getting blown out to the current sitting Republican senator. Yeah, again, my thesis is about to be put to the test. At this point, we might want to root for the socialists to beat the Democrats in these primaries. I'm just saying it might actually get to that point where it's like, for Republicans, it's just better if these socialists actually win these primaries because they're going to be easier to beat in general elections. And that poll out there in Maine, I think the polls out there in New York as well, too, kind of drive that point. The New York race should not be that close. I think that the economy is going to get better. I think that things are going to get better for Trump. I think right now it's probably as bad as it's going to be, right? I can't imagine things being worse in terms of overall sentiment where we're at, but things typically kind of get better. And I think if things get better, again, specifically on the economy, we're going to see a lot of these general election races. If communists, socialists are in these races versus Republicans in these swing states, even left of center states like Maine, right? And who knows, possibly deep blue states like New York. Yeah, Republicans are going to be competitive. And in some cases, they're going to win in blowouts. Like, again, what is happening in Maine. So we're going to see, but this is a terrible, terrible, terrible sign for Democrats whose party is currently being taken over by far-left lunatics who are going to have a hard time winning in general elections. So let me know what you guys think. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Most importantly, share a Black conservative perspective. Peace.